Geek out!
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, Freddy's coming for you. 5, 6, Freddy's coming for you. 7, 8, Freddy's coming for you. 9, 10, Freddy's coming for you. In the late 1960s, a band of vigilante parents rounds up acquitted child molester Fred Krueger and set fire to his work shack, killing him in the process. Then, in the early 1980s, the remaining children of those parents seem to be hunted down by some unseen killer while they slumber. What is the connection, and can the kids figure it out before they fall asleep again? All right, welcome to my new series, A Nightmare on Geek Out Street. This time I decided to go with a pun instead of the original working title, partially because I realized that with the Friday the 13th podcast, The Long Night at Camp Blood is actually a common title for various shows talking about Friday the 13th. So I decided to go with one that was a little bit more unique, probably. So welcome to A Nightmare on Geek Out Street, a retrospective on the Nightmare on Elm Street film series. If you listened to The Long Night at Camp Blood, where I talked about the Friday the 13th movies, it's going to be very much the same, except, you guessed it, we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. So to kind of go along with the first episode of the Friday the 13th one, I am running solo on this one here, where we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. I will say, let's see. Well, I always started out with asking my guest how they got into Nightmare on Elm Street, so I shall do the same. So Nightmare on Elm Street, I think I got introduced to Friday the 13th first, but Nightmare on Elm Street has always been the one that holds truer to my heart, and I talk about it on the Friday the 13th. But if you're new to the podcast, let's pretend like everyone's new, because every episode is someone's first episode. Stan Lee said something like that about comic books. My first memory of Freddy Krueger is I was walking through Blockbuster Video. There's a throwback. And I saw, I guess recently, the Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Child. I believe that's part 5, maybe part 4. We'll get to it. Sorry that I don't have the part numbers memorized just yet. But I guess that had recently come out, because I remember seeing the cover for that. And if you don't know the cover, it's got a really creepy baby stroller that's all like hell, spiky and shit like that. And then it's just got Freddy Krueger sitting over, resting his shoulder or his elbow on it with his claws out, and he's just like, I'm a Freddy Krueger. This is what I always look like. And so, me being a child of like maybe 6 years of age, that terrified me, because he's got a burned up face, he's got knives for fingers, and there's a creepy preambulator for all my UK fans. I think I was recently told that a stroller and a perambulator are not the exact same thing, that a pram is a very specific type of stroller. But whatever, we're going to go with it. You can look up the cover if you really need to correct me, at the E.G. Nolan on Twitter. So that terrified me. I vividly remember that night having a dream, even though not properly knowing that Freddy Krueger, attacks you and kills you in your dreams. I vividly remember having a dream where he was chasing me in my house, and it terrified me, and I stayed away from him for a very long time. When did I get into Freddy Krueger? I guess around the same time that I checked out Friday the 13th, so like the mid-90s, so only like 4 or 5 years after that fact, but I decided I randomly picked up Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warrior, which I will still contend, and I'm pretty sure after this watch through I will still agree that it is the best one. And I think that's the general consensus too, that Part 3, Dream Warriors, is the best. We'll find out. Who knows? I might change my mind. I definitely changed my mind about which one the worst Friday the 13th was while watching the series. So let's see if I can do the same with this. Off the top of my head, I can't think of which one I think is the worst out of the Nightmare series. As it stands right now, I'll go on record that it currently is Part 2, which is, I think, universally recognized as the weakest installment. Maybe not the worst installment, but like the weakest, because right out the gates, they tried to do something weird and different, and nobody liked it. I do think that, like, now that it's over, now that it's almost 30 years old, people are going back and revisiting it and being like, oh, hey, it's not that bad. So I haven't seen it in years, so maybe next episode when we talk about Friday the 13th Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, I believe that's what it's called, I will sing a different tune. Who knows? Maybe. But so after watching Nightmare Part 3, fell in love with it, tried to consume as many of them as possible, eventually buying the entire series at the time. Well, I guess technically the entire classic series on DVD in a box set that has, on the spines, it has Freddy being all cool, like, ho, look at me, I've got knife fingers. Because that's what he does. But which means out of all the slasher movies, it is the one that I own the most copies of on home video. To the point that good buddy, friend of the show, Ken Walker, and former co-host of Laser Dicks, he was on Jason X. He, for Christmas, bought me the first Nightmare on Elm Street on Laserdisc, which is pretty cool. That's the version that I watched today in preparation for the show. So I think that's enough. I mean, like I said, Freddy Krueger, favorite of the slashers. You got your Friday the 13th, you got your Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, I guess. It's a little weird. I don't typically put Hellraiser in with the slashers because that's a slightly different thing, but I can understand people putting Pinhead and all of that, all the Cenobites in with the slashers. But I feel a little weird doing it, but we can discuss that. And then Texas Chainsaw Massacre, don't let me forget that one because that's a big one. I think those are the big, what is that, 5? I think that's the big ones. Then there's like some smaller ones that didn't get as many sequels and stuff like that, but they're still pretty cool. But out of all of those, Halloween 1, for sure, hands down, best movie. And that's probably just because I love John Carpenter so much, and I, too, am an independent filmmaker, and at the time, he was super independent filmmaker. But then again, most of these guys, for the first installments, were glorified independent filmmakers. So cool, but John Carpenter did everything by himself, quote unquote. But he wrote the score, directed it. I think he probably wrote it. At the very least, I'm pretty sure the characters are based on his ideas. I think his wife helped him write it. Anyway, who knows? We'll probably do a Halloween series after Nightmare on Elm Street because I love slasher movies. And it'll give me something to do for the next year and a half, 2 years almost. Especially if you throw in like Texas Chainsaw and Hellraiser, and those are the ones that really make me not want to sleep at night because those are the gross ones. You know what I'm saying? Like these ones are quote unquote fun slasher movies. Your Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween. Those are like the fun ones that like their low budgets were made it so that their deaths look cheesy and corny, whereas like Texas Chainsaw, they used all of their budget on making it gross. Blood and viscera everywhere. Anyway, this is not a podcast about all slasher movies. This is a podcast about Nightmare on Elm Street, and specifically this episode is Nightmare on Elm Street, the original. Just A Nightmare on Elm Street, or Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, which, real quick, right out the bat, R.I.P., rest in peace, Wes Craven. We were actually recording an episode of Geek Out, what was it, almost a year, 2 years ago when the news broke, and I kind of had to stop talking because celebrity deaths don't usually faze me too much because I'm of the mindset of I don't know them personally, so the things that I know them for are like movies or music or whatever, and I can just pop those in, watch them, listen to them, and I'll be fine. But Wes Craven, that was something that like hit me hard because he was, you know, such an influence on my filmmaking. And I'm sure, you know, heaven forbid, but of course it's going to happen. When the same thing happens to John Carpenter, I'm going to be just as much, if not more, of a wreck, because he was even broader of a filmmaker in terms of like what I consumed than Wes Craven. But so R.I.P. Wes Craven, your works are wonderful. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty behind the scenes stuff that happened in Nightmare on Elm Street. So real quick, it was theatrically released on November 9th, 1984 by New Line Cinemas. And unlike Friday the 13th, the same production company maintained the rights, I'm pretty sure, all the way up through the remake. We'll touch on that when we get to the remake. But for sure, all the way up to Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy was owned by New Line Cinemas. So good job on you, New Line Cinemas. And we'll get into some of the more specifics about that because it's a very interesting story with New Line Cinemas. In fact, I think that's one of the first things that we touch on when I actually get into the story behind it. But so runtime, 91 minutes, solid for a slasher movie of the 80s. Written by Wes Craven, produced by Robert Shea, and then directed by Wes Craven. So doing double duties on this one. And then, let's see, it was filmed at various locations around the L.A. area. So apparently L.A. makes a good Ohio. Had a budget of $1.8 million and grossed $25.5 million. So good on them for that. And well-deserved, because that movie looks beautiful. Like, a lot more skill went into it. Not to shit on Friday the 13th, but we all can acknowledge that a lot of heart went into Friday the 13th, but not a lot of skill, because everyone was very, very much new to the game. It was practically a student film, whereas Nightmare on Elm Street was professionals who just worked on a lower budget. All right. So here's some of the backstory behind the movie. It was inspired by the success of films like Halloween and Friday the 13th, both coming out. I think Halloween came out, in 78, 79, and then Friday the 13th came out in 80, 81-ish, around there. Wes Craven sought to make a film inspired by several nods to his childhood. The concept of a killer dream came from 3 actual news articles from the LA Times in the 70s about Southeast Asian refugees. Apparently, a number of men were suffering from disturbing nightmares, likely caused by the war and genocide that, they were fleeing from because they were fucking refugees. Sorry, I'm a big fan of, taking care of refugees. But this is not a political podcast. This is a Nightmare on Elm Street podcast. And so because of their disturbing nightmares, they would refuse to sleep. Some of them then would die while sleeping once they succumbed to the exhaustion. The actual phenomenon apparently is a known thing called Asian death syndrome, which I wasn't able to find too much about, and I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole of looking that up. But so it's a thing, and granted, people die in their sleep all the time, and I'm sure traumatic nightmares, are taxing on the heart, so it's probably going to kill you eventually, if not right away. And then here's probably the most interesting fact that I found the entire time I was researching this. The song Dreamweaver by Gary Wright. You heard that right. Dreamweaver, the song that plays in Wayne from Wayne's World's head as he's looking up at Tia Carrera's character. What the hell's her name? Sorry. Whatever. This is not a Wayne's World podcast. But so just Dreamweaver. All that jazz. That song inspired the main synth riff for the soundtrack of Nightmare on Elm Street. The that kind of ominous reverb and a little bit of the doo 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 doo. I'm a little under the weather, so I can't hum the tune right now. But so yeah, listen to the first 30 seconds of Dreamweaver. And have Nightmare on Elm Street in your head, and you will hear exactly what I'm talking about. Because I I don't think I'd ever heard the opening to Dreamweaver, so when I read that, I was like, what the fuck? And I looked it up on YouTube, and sure enough, right off the bat, as soon as I hit play, I'm like, oh, Freddy's coming after me. I'm stuck in the dream world. Where is he? But yeah, so there's that. There's also the well-known story of how Freddy's look came about from one night as a young Wes Craven spotted an elderly man walking or standing outside his house wearing essentially the same clothes, the fedora hat, dirty old sweater, and just kind of looking creepily at Wes Craven, and it spooked him. And when he started writing Nightmare on Elm Street in 1981, he was like, I've got it. I know the exact spookiest thing I've ever seen. And it wasn't Large Marge, because Large Marge didn't come out for another couple years. But it is spooky. I just recently rewatched Pee-wee's Big Adventure with my little niece, and I apologized to her profusely because she was too young to see Large Marge. But I was like, I was about the same age when I saw it, but apparently she had the appropriate response to Large Marge: terror. So then, where was I? Oh, so originally in the script, Freddy Krueger was intended to be a full-on child molester, but because of a rash of molestation cases popping up around the area that they were shooting, and production in general was going on at the time, Wes Craven decided to kind of dial it back and be like, you know what? Let's not look like we're kind of not glorifying. Well, I guess glorifying. If you're looking at it with the intent to be offended, you might be, oh, this guy's being glorified as a child molester. So they switched it to just a straight up child killer or child murderer, as they often refer to him. And I mean, murder is more accurate. So that's why you're like, this guy totally molests children, but they never talk about it, because they made the specific effort to do so. Let's see. And also the name Freddy Krueger or Fred Krueger comes from a bully that Wes Craven had to deal with in school. So shame on you, but I guess congratulations for getting your name in a movie. And then also the red and green colors on his sweater. He chose red and green because those are the two most contrasting colors for the human retina to interpret. So, like, you look at that and subconsciously you're already thinking, oh, that's bad. I don't want to look at that guy. I don't want to be around that guy. That kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. That's some clever thinking on Wes Craven's part. So, like I said, the script was completed in 1981 after production wrapped on Swamp Thing, which you should check that out. It's a pretty good movie, too. Oddly enough, Walt Disney Productions was one of the first studios that showed interest in producing the film, but Craven declined their offer after they said he'd have to tone it down so that it could be presentable for younger audiences. And he's like, no, it's a horror movie. It's rated R. Come on, guys. So then Paramount said it was too similar to Dreamscape, a movie that they were in production already with. It's an alright movie. You should check it out too. But like the fact that you probably know Nightmare on Elm Street better than Dreamscape shows how wrong Paramount was. And Craven even framed the rejection letter that he received from Universal Studios. Although I was not able to find anything that specifically said why Universal did not want him, unlike Disney and Paramount saying specifically why they didn't want it. Eventually, the fledgling New Line Cinema picked it up to be their first production. At this point, New Line had pretty much only been a distributor, but they were like, sure, why not? We're about to go bankrupt. Why don't we try producing a movie? And where I lost my place. Sorry. Then Nightmare. Oh yeah, and then just so like I said earlier, Nightmare was a huge success and probably the reason why New Line didn't go bankrupt at the time. I think they're still I think they're still around. I mean, yes, they are still around. But like, you know, so good on them for believing in the little script that could A Nightmare on Elm Street. And then originally David Warner, who you might know, or at least I had to double check because I was like, I recognize that name. Why do I know it? I know him as Dillinger and Master Control in Tron, but he's a huge actor. He's been in a lot of things. But originally he was cast as Freddy Krueger, but had to back out, and Craven went on a big search again to find a new Freddy, and finally settling on England because he had such a great audition, proving that he was capable of going to a quote-unquote dark place around children. Apparently, a lot of people that were auditioning were not ready to be as sadistic as Robert Englund could be, and thank God, because I'm sure David Warner would have done a great job, but like I can't think of anyone else playing Freddy Krueger, even though someone else has, and did an all right job. I have issues with the movie more so than with Earl. What's his name? The guy that played Rorschach in Watchmen and Freddy Krueger in the remake. Jackie Earl Haley. Fun fact about him is that he actually auditioned to be Gale? Is that his name? Glenn. He auditioned to be Glenn. Did not get the role, but the friend who drove him to the audition, Johnny Depp, did, and ended up landing his first feature film role. Possibly his first film role. I don't know if he was an actor. He probably was an actor, but somehow managed to he John Connored it, because that's what's his name? The kid that played John Connor in Terminator 2. That's similar to what he did. He got picked up in front of a YMCA by James Cameron, which, that's not creepy at all. But so what happens in this movie? So we start out showing Tina. Well, actually, we start showing Freddy Krueger sharpening his blades, and then it cuts to Tina already in the dream world, being creeped out and chased by Freddy Krueger. He doesn't kill her right away. She wakes up from being spooked, and her mom has a great line. She shows that her nightgown has been slashed because Freddy Krueger has knife hands or fingers. And her mom has this great line of like, you need to cut your nails or stop having bad dreams, one or the other. And I was like, good parenting. Tell your kid to stop having bad dreams. I mean, it was cute because it was like, you got two options as far as I can tell, and one of them's impossible. So why don't you do the other? Naturally, being a parent in a horror movie has no idea what's really going on. So then after that, she goes to school, meets up with her friends. Oh, actually, real quick, that transition between that scene and the next scene, I really loved because it plays with the audience. It's already starting off like, does the audience know whether you're awake or asleep? Because like the cold open being like in the dream world, like whatever, like the audience can handle that, and like then being pulled awake. It's like we got the visual cue, but then. Wes Craven does this beautiful thing where he has a fuzzy lens, a Vaseline lens, on a shot of 2 or 3 girls playing jump rope, and they're doing the song, the proper song, not the way that I sung it at the beginning of the show. But that was a joke. That was an inside joke between me, my friend Stephanie, and all of our friends who play Dead by Daylight, where you can be Freddy Krueger as one of the killers. She doesn't know the song, so she messed up singing it. That's the joke. So it cuts. It has those girls playing jump rope and singing the song, and you're like, oh, okay, she's falling back asleep. She's in the dream world, and then it pans over to the right, and it shows the car full of the kids, and the Vaseline lens slowly fades out, and it's just a regular lens, and you're like, oh, no, we're in the real world. Well, fuck, how do I know what's real and what's fake? And that's wonderful because the entire rest of the movie plays with that. You don't actually know. A lot of times you don't actually know when the dream actually started because so many of the dreams blend with what was going on in real life. Like when Nancy's in school after Tina dies, when Nancy's in school, and she's just sitting there kind of paying attention to the teacher, and then she looks over to the right and sees Tina in a body bag standing, and you're like, oh shit, she's in a dream. How long has she been in a dream? And like there's little visual cues or audio clues if you are paying attention. But even then, like I'm a big fan of the idea that like you don't actually know 100% when these people start dreaming and when they're still awake. And it's wonderful. It's another thing that makes these movies one of my favorite horror series, because legitimate terrified of dying in my sleep. So it works for me on a personal level, and that's why it works for me on a horror level. It genuinely scares me. And also, Freddy's fun, more so in the later installments, but Freddy's fun. He enjoys killing his victims. It's not just a chore or a vendetta for him, or just something he has to do, like Michael. And he talks, which I love the silent killer, don't get me wrong. But like, if you're going to talk with style, But so before Tina dies, they have a little sleepover because she's terrified of being alone, and that's when her boyfriend Rod, what a piece of shit name, invades the sleepover, and they have their makeup sex, and then that's when Freddy comes for her in a cool dream sequence, and even cooler with the way that it shows her death, because we don't see her dying in the dream world per se. We see what happens to her body in the real world, and that I think is one of the things that makes this movie stand out even more, or this movie series stand out even more, is because like you're literally seeing what the other people would be seeing during this death. And they have one of those spinning rooms, which are awesome. Whenever a movie employs them correctly, it's wonderful, and it's not the only time that this movie uses that spinning room technology. But so she flies up to the ceiling, she's getting cut to shit, blood's everywhere, and then she moves around the room, and Rod is freaking out because he's like, "Oh, someone's killing my girl, but I don't know who it is because I got up your nose with a spinning lawnmower." It's an actual line. But not during that scene, but it is an actual line that he says. So naturally, boyfriend is accused of the murder because who else would it be? No one else was in the room with him. He runs away. Nancy's dad is a cop and uses her as bait to get him. I'm brushing over a lot of the minor details. I'll get to the deaths, though. The deaths are cool. Fast forward a little bit. Nancy learns some of the background information as to who Freddy Krueger is. Then she has a dream where she watches Freddy Krueger going to kill Rod, and she is able to wake herself up and run to the police station with Glennie Depp, and they get to witness him supposedly hanging himself with the sheet, although we, the audience, see the sheet acting like a snake, coiling itself around his neck and dragging him up. And at some point, there's a sleep study done where they're monitoring Nancy's REM and whatnot, and she realizes that she can pull objects out of her dream because she... Sorry, I don't normally talk this much straight, so my throat's very dry, and I don't have any water to soothe it. But she finds out that she can take Freddy's hat out, and then later figures out that she can probably take his whole body out then, too. And she Home Alones the shit out of her house. And, sets up booby traps and stuff like that, and then calls Glenn to be like, hey, make sure to stay awake. So naturally that means that Glenn falls asleep, gets sucked into his bed, and a fountain of blood just sprays out, which is glorious. And that's the other instance of the rotating room, because it would have looked like an actual fountain with, like, it spraying off to the sides and whatnot had it been a normal room, but because it's flipped upside down, it's just shooting straight to the ceiling. Then Nancy is like, all right, fine, I'm going, I'm in it to win it. I'm going it alone. And she goes through, the booby trap house, trying to ensnare Freddy. Freddy then, and at some point, her dad gets back to the house. Oh, she rummages around their basement. Their basement turns into a boiler room, which then turns into their basement again. And then and she finds the glove and fun stuff like that. Then she and her father end up back in the house, and they find that Freddy Krueger is after he had been set fire by Nancy, he's climbed back up to the top floor of the house and is strangling her mother, his wife, and then he puts out the fire with a top sheet, which somehow works. And then when they pull it away, she's just a charred skeleton and gets sucked down into the bed, down into the pits of hell, presumably, which is a very cool visual. And then she figures out that she can just be like, you know what? I'm not afraid of you. I'm turning my back on you. This is some bullshit Buddhist stuff that Glenn told me in the beginning of the movie. I take away your power. And he goes, no, and swipes at her, but just, turns into a force ghost and disappears. And then she's like, yay, I won. And then the next morning, presumably, she goes out to meet her friends because she was like, I want all my friends back. So she goes outside to meet her friends. They pull up in the same car that you see them, that they're introduced in the beginning of the movie. Her mom steps out, so everyone who is dead is back alive. And she's like, it's gonna be a beautiful day. And then they get into the car and kids start singing, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. And somehow magically Freddy's hand pops through the little peephole. Not peephole, it's a bit bigger than a peephole, but like not big enough to fit a body through hole in the door. And yanks the mother back in the house as the soft top is closing on the car, and you see that the soft top is the same, green and red stripes as Freddy's sweater, leading you to believe that Nancy never escaped the dream world, and that this was all an elaborate ruse to get her and kill her. And so, actually, yeah, technically, yeah, as far as we're aware, at the end of the movie, Nancy is dead. So yeah, that's the movie. One neat thing that I did notice while I was doing research is that, like, all of the deaths are supposed to, like, kind of be symbolic of like, various types of, like, teen angst and stuff like that. So, suicide, rape, stuff like that, are all hinted at in the couple deaths that are in the movie. So I thought that was cool. I like it when movies take a little bit of care and time into the shit that they're presenting. Then just to wrap it up with the little cool facts or feels that I have about the movie. Cold open length. If you're counting from where she wakes up from the dream, that's 3 minutes and 38 seconds. Although I count all the way up until the scene change to the girls singing the jump rope song, so that's 4 minutes and 21 seconds. Although it's not like Friday the 13th where they flash the title to let you know when the cold open's over. I guess if you really wanted to, you could say that the cold open is just him sharpening his nails, but like, I like a little bit more excitement in my cold open. Location, it was set in Springwood, Ohio, specifically Elm Street and, like, the school and sleep center around that area. But for the most part, Elm Street in Springwood, Ohio. Timeline, it's set in the year 1981, even though it was released later. So pulling a little Friday the 13th there. Although they jump to the future more so than anything else in Friday the 13th. Kill count. Freddy kills 4 people, and only 4 people. Well, 5 if you count Nancy. I know in part 3 and part 9, she's back, so she survives. Although in part 9 she's not Nancy. But in part 3 we know that she survived because she's still around. But as far as we're aware, until part 3, she's dead. So the kill count is actually currently at 5. 5 people dead in the series. Best kill, I'm gonna say it's gonna be Glenn for me, Glenny Depp, because much like how Freddy's my favorite because he actually scares me, because I'm terrified of dying in my sleep. My bed is my safe zone. Nothing can hurt me in my bed. Like little kids, if your foot is dangling off your bed, a demon that's hiding underneath your bed can grab it and pull you down. But as long as you are on the bed and no dangles or anything like that, you are safe. And that's still the mentality that I have. And I know a lot of adults still have it, so stop snickering. But just in general, I feel safe when I'm in my bed. Covers around me, nothing can hurt me. Even your laughter, it can't hurt me, can't penetrate my pillow, and my blanket. So that one, best kill because it's, again, actually terrifying. There's a kill like that in The Grudge. I think it's The Grudge, where I was like, nope. Lamest kill, I guess I'm gonna go with Nancy because it's off screen. And see, so was there a killing spree? Not really, because only 4 people die and all of them are spaced out by 20 minutes. So no, I'm gonna say that there just straight up wasn't a killing spree in this movie. Had they all died within 20 minutes of each other, then sure, that would have been a 20-minute killing spree. But Tina dies at 18 minutes, Rod dies at 45 minutes, Glenn dies at almost an hour 10, and Marge dies at almost an hour 25. So it's there's no real spree killing in this movie. And if I remember correctly, in general, Nightmare on Elm Street films don't have a killing spree per se, much like Friday the 13th does, because that was body count was the name of the game, and also a great band. Look them up. But yeah, so there's that. Evolution of Freddy. Well, this is our first introduction of Freddy. All we know is that he is a supernatural being that can enter your dreams, and he used to be a real man that parents killed. And he's got knife fingers on his glove. Weapons used other than his gloves: a bed sheet, a bed, and fire. And I guess his hands, because he's kind of strangling the mom while he's setting her on fire. Did the victims deserve to die? So I haven't put it's since this is more of a revenge type storyline, there's not as much as the twisted morality that Friday the 13th has, but I figured I'd keep that alive because there still are fornicators, Tina and Rod, and there are still drug and alcohol users, Marge, but save for being kind of a pushy horn dog to his girlfriend, Glenn was pretty much an innocent. And even though he was come on, I got blue balls, she was no, and he was fine, morality sucks. So he's still kind of he's the nicest nice guy that you can be without actually being a proper human being. I guess you could call it. So he's still kind of got that nice guy neckbeard, we're kind of dating sort of, so we should be having sex, but whatever. This isn't a social justice warrior podcast. This is a Nightmare on Elm Street podcast. Whatever. He, for all intents and purposes, especially with the 80s movies being what they were, he's an innocent. And same with Nancy, because she is the virginal hero girl. And then how was the killer defeated? Nancy turning her back on him, but also, as we know, Freddy comes back because cue up, it was all a dream. So she's dead until we see her in part 3. So that was Nightmare on Elm Street, the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you will join me on this journey through my favorite horror slasher series, because it's fun. And I hope you have your Hypnosil and your No-Dose ready, because it's going to be a long night. Whew, that was a good sign-off, and I just made it up on the spot. Bye.
This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday. And you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.